Hello, 40 Waters. Longtime listeners of the show will know that I'm a big believer in education, especially music education, and I'm excited to announce that this episode is brought to you by TrueFire. I've partnered with TrueFire to bring you an opportunity to get into their lessons at an affordable rate in a way that's going to help you, help the podcast, and get you playing more guitar. I'm excited to say that you can use the code 40WATT, 40WATT, at checkout to get 40% off your first or next purchase through TrueFire. That includes their All Access Pass to have access to all of their lessons and videos and jams. I highly recommend it. I use it myself. I'm a huge fan. I truly believe in TrueFire's motto of live, practice, and play. Please use the link below to get started, and happy learning. This episode is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. There's a wonderful crew of people over on Patreon giving money every month to make sure that this show and this podcast happen and cut my overhead costs so that I can keep doing it. I can't express my thanks enough for their support and their belief in what we're doing over here. And if you'd like to join them and help support this podcast, you can do so by going over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast. For as little as $3 a month, you can support this show. And actually, now that we are starting to get sponsors for the episode, my $3 supporters will get the episodes ad-free. If you want to support at a $5 level, you'll get ad-free episodes and you will get additional content every week. I thank all of you that have given money to help keep this going, and I thank all of you that are going to become supporters and help make sure this show keeps happening. Thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome 40 Watt Podcast Season 3, Episode 3. We're all up in the threes. Thank you for joining us. We're going to have a great conversation, and I'm really excited about the topics we're going to bring up today. But first, I want to say thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for your support. You help make this show happen. If you actually listened through the intro, those of you that aren't Patreon supporters understand that's a big deal in how we fund this show. And actually, I want to give a shout out at the top of the show to a couple of new Patreon supporters. We have Nick Call joining us at the $5 a month level, which is our medium wattage level. And we also have a first on this show. Blake Jefferson has joined us at the elite wattage. That is the $50 a month level. And Blake, you have earned yourself some Zoom lessons, and we're going to chat. I sent you a message on Patreon, so make sure you go over and check your messages, get back to me, and we're going to schedule a time to hang out. If you also want to help make this show happen, you can go over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast, and you can make that happen. All right, moving into the episode this week, I've got Scott Hamilton from the Effects Loop podcast. Scott, what's up?
Is this my third appearance on the show?
I don't know. It's at least 3. I feel like I may be missing one.
It might be fourth. It might be fourth.
Yeah, we're getting up in number of episodes at this point now where I'm like, I'm fuzzy on some of them. I got a message. So this is like last week, right? I had Joe Branton on the podcast, and I was also on the Guitar Nerds podcast. So Joe Branton and I recorded 4 episodes in one day. We recorded the Guitar Nerds, the Guitar Nerds Patreon, 40 Watt podcast, and the 40 Watt Patreon. I forgot everything that we talked about. Jimmy brought it up to me. He started talking to me about something that we talked about on the Patreon. I was like, I'm so glad you told me where I talked about that, because I had completely forgotten which one of these shows we had talked about this thing on. I was like, oh, it was a weird day. We did like 4.5, 5 hours of podcasting, like straight. I was wiped.
Yikes. Yeah, I've had a few moments like that recently too, where someone was talking to me about, they were looking at the MXR Poly Blue Octaver, and they were like, why aren't there any used ones? I was like, well, it came out like last month, so what are you talking about? And he's like, dude, this thing's like a year old. And I'm like, huh.
Yeah, it is.
That everything is just blending into itself, and like, yeah, I'm losing track of time.
That's one that's been on my radar too. I actually sold my octave pedal with the intent of buying the MXR Poly Blue and then didn't buy it. So I probably need to back up and do that.
I will still say TC Electronics subbing up. People are sleeping on.
That's a good one. That's a really, really good one. I liked the idea. There was something about the fact that it had the fuzz on the poly blue that I was like, it's pretty decent fuzz too.
It's a fuzz
It's not
switch,
bad.
though.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing.
But let's also be honest. If they said it right, fuzzes don't need knobs.
100%.
You and I, you always just fuzz full out, gain full out, volume at unity plus a little bit.
There's one setting, max.
It's like I use a lot of solid gold fuzzes that I swap in and out, and they just have tone switches. They don't need tone knobs. They just have tone switches. Here's the 3 settings you're going to use. Have a nice day.
That's it. 100%. And I like fuzz face style fuzzes, so we all know there's only one setting for those. Just
full
up, just max. So, but yeah, I need to break down and buy one of those one of these days. We'll see.
Did I man, we're in full tangent mode even before we even really start.
Look, did you listen to last week's episode? Joe and I talked about beer and whiskey for 25 minutes before we even brought up a guitar.
Well, this is Joe. Yeah, that's on brand.
Actually, somebody told me y'all should straight up do a spinoff podcast called 40 Pint.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
The 40 ounce podcast.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. See, need to make it happen.
They just drink malt liquor. You can do Edward 40 hands for the episode. You can't hit pause until you finish the bottle.
That'd be so good.
College was a long time ago, man.
Yeah, it was a long time ago and not that long ago all at the same time.
Where was I? I don't even know where it was.
You were in full tangent. Fuzz.
Oh, yeah. So I rebuilt my board or changed some stuff around on my gigging board. So I added a fuzz to my board. So the one thing, well, there's a few things Quad Cortex doesn't really get, but it doesn't capture fuzzes very well. So I was really missing just that organic fuzz face feel.
Yeah.
So I put my board together and plug the wireless in, and it starts just howling.
Yeah, no.
So I had to put a pickup simulator in there to get rid of that the entire time, like regardless of what was going on.
They don't like wireless units at all.
Nope, but a passive pickup simulator cleans it right up.
That's really interesting. Basically all it's doing is changing the impedance, right?
Impedance and inductance. So it's mostly an inductor. That's why it's kind of expensive, because inductors are kind of an expensive part. But yeah, just doing that.
Interesting.
Fixes it up.
Yeah, I still to this day use fuzz off board. So which really bothers me. I say bothers me. I've got a couple of fuzzes that are power only, no battery. And so I had to buy one of those clips that you attach it to a battery, then you plug it in the barrel plug.
Oh, yeah, those.
Yeah.
I just made some. They're just laying around.
Yeah.
Those are great. Like every guitar player should have like 2 of those. Because when you build a pedal board, something will go wrong and you need to test power. And it's the easiest way to just check everything that's working.
And they're cheap as hell. They're
it's a 10-cent clip and a barrel.
Yep.
So just buy it when you're buying everything else.
Or if you want, you can just go. I think I saw D'Addario sells them now. Like you can just buy them, like 2 of them for like $8.
Nice.
Pre-built, super cheap. I saw them at a music store recently. I discovered a new music store over in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and was just walking around there, and they had a big, I think it was D'Addario, a big D'Addario display. And I always go over and look at the parts and like the things. And like, was there a cable I'm forgetting I'm needing? Is there a thing that I was like, oh yeah, I needed to pick one of these up. I always look because my brain's not going to hold on to it.
Is there something that I've existed for 25 years without ever needing, but suddenly need, and it's under $10?
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
Capitalism.
But yeah, they had those already. I was like, I've never seen these for sale before. Definitely never seen them from D'Addario or whatever company it was I was looking at. But they're here. So guys, go get them. They're super cheap. I wish I had one handy to just be like, here's what it is. But it's a battery clip attached to a 2.1 millimeter barrel. I mean, it's super simple.
If someone wanted to get really enterprising, one of the clips that a 9-volt battery can just sit into with a barrel jack on the end of it, and you just put dual lock on the back of it.
So the one I have,
just stick it on a pedal.
The one that I have is actually that. It's a little neoprene sleeve for the
Perfect.
battery to go into.
Perfect.
And a sticky on the back of it. So you could take the sticky, it's like you peel the thing off and now you can just stick it to something.
Yep.
Well, if you take that off and then stick it to some dual lock, you're ready to go. You can put it anywhere you need it.
There you go.
It's brilliant. It's so simple. So there's your tip for the day. So speaking of tips for today, Scott, something we've been talking about this for, I don't know, last week or two. We've been going back and forth talking about guitar amps.
Yeah, Phillip, I need help.
Yeah. So
I need help.
Well, and your conversation, this conversation we've been having brought up a really interesting point that I think I'd overlooked or taken for granted. That's really the thing. I had taken for granted the fact that I spent my 20s, like when I wasn't in school and I wasn't working because I was in school, or I was working a bar gig, so my days were free. I spent most of that time in a music store with my buddy whose dad owned the music store, and we just played all the amps and guitars that came through the music store all day. That's what we did. We talked and played guitars and amps. So I've played and owned the list of amps I've owned. We'll talk about that in a minute. Is very, very, very long. And it's everything from, well, I say new, like 2010 new and back. Like tons of vintage stuff. I've played a bunch of like everything from like the Silvertone amp in the case kind of thing to like legit 50-watt JMP Marshall half stacks kind of thing. Like everything came through that store. But you came to me and you were actually, for the first time since I've known you, you were sort of like, I want to buy an amp.
Well, yeah, and let's back this up a little bit here.
Yeah.
It's not that I haven't been an amp guy.
Right? No,
like,
that's not the case.
I have killer amps too, and it's one of those things. It's like I came to you saying, "Dude, I don't think I know how to shop for an amp."
Yeah,
and it was kind of this weird revelation because like my career as a player or whatever, right? Amps have always found me.
Yep.
So my first amp was the amp I bought when I was in 8th grade. It's a piece of crap, but whatever. High school, I bought a Marshall Valve State 2x12. That was from another guitar player that I knew. So I knew it was a good amp. It did everything I wanted to do at the time. I was young enough to carry it.
And it was a Marshall.
It was a Marshall with a tube in it. I was there.
A tube.
A tube. It also had an acoustic simulator in it.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Somehow I managed to either forget that or block it. Just completely.
It had a multi-effect thing in it.
Oh dear.
Yeah,
Sweet
big old foot switch. College, got a Hot Rod Deluxe.
Yeah.
Natural, the one everyone buys.
Literally an amp that I think 90% of guitar players have had at some point.
And still great amp, and I would happily use one again.
Oh yeah.
As long as I know now to turn it up.
That's a big
at the
deal.
time I didn't, because that's the other part. Like I went from like solid state to like hybrid to like that. I just didn't really know how amps worked. Went to the Super Reverb, fell in my lap. That was a buddy sent me a listing saying, "Hey, is this a good deal?" And I told him if he doesn't buy it, I will. And so he went, "You got it." And so I went and got a vintage Super Reverb for $700.
As you should.
I left work, went to the ATM, and drove an hour to go pick it up.
What's the furthest? Just total side note. What's the farthest you've ever driven for a deal?
That
Really? An hour?
Yep. Dude, it's I live in Chicagoland. Everything's within an hour.
That's true. I live in Mississippi, where an hour just gets me to like the next field. Where
I've got
like
10 million people within an hour of me.
Yeah, there's not 10 million in my state. So, yeah, I drove during the pandemic. Was the farthest I've ever driven for a deal. I drove from Starkville, Mississippi to Paducah, Kentucky to buy an SVT and 8x10.
The mileage on carrying that 8x10 home.
But I got that 8x10 and the SVT for $900.
Not bad at all.
Not a bad deal.
All right, continuing the journey.
Yes.
A few years back, my Vox AC15 hand wired, was me buying it from a buddy as a favor.
Oh,
with the expectation he'd buy it back for me at some point, because he needed money. One of those kind of situations. I've done that for a few people. And you know what? They never buy it back. Those people never have money again.
That's
funny
true.
How that works.
No, 100%.
So, word of wisdom. I got a great amp for a great price out of it. So I was running both those amps together for a while with the Super Reverb with the Vox.
Look, that's a stellar combination. People
it's
sleep
the praise
on
and worship. It's a praise and worship combination too.
Well, it's even more than that. That is Josh Smith's go-to, or was at one time his go-to combination. Now, when Josh Smith goes on the road and he has to worry about backline, he tells them Super Reverb and a Vox AC30 because they're readily available. And he doesn't care if it's the reissues or anything like that. He's like, that's just, if I've got to do backline, that's what I want.
Yeah, and it's accessible.
Yep.
Okay, so that ends the amp journey because I would not call my PV Decade part of my amp journey. That's just a toy for fun. And there was like a Fender Greta in there at one point, but that doesn't really count for anything. That was an amp to have in my office. And like Boss Katana was in there is in there too, but that's constantly being loaned out. Because it's a great amp to loan people. Then let's call it, I don't know, early 2020, I got my hands on a Kemper. All the amps
was
are
it really
available.
2020? For some reason, I thought you had one sooner.
No, actually, that was part of the that wonderful part of 2020 where everything was getting shut down and everyone was panic selling everything. And I still had a job and a stable paycheck, and I gobbled it all up at really great prices.
Oh.
So I got what now doesn't look like a great deal on a Kemper, but at the time it was a fantastic deal on a Kemper.
So that's my whole, and this is a completely side tangent thing. That's my biggest fear with buying into. It's a dumb reason to be hesitant about buying into the digital gear world, but it is the worry that eventually, this gear is going to get left behind, value wise. It's going to at some point.
I think you should have that same fear about JHS and Walrus pedals.
I could see
and
that.
any of those kind of things, because now they're doing the whole, well, here's our V2, here's our V3, here's our V4, and you watch the deprecation happens.
Yeah.
Until there's like a magic, like the V1s still hold their value for some of them, but yeah, like that's what happens.
Yep. No, it is a thing, and not to go like hardcore boomer, I don't know, prepper something, but it's like there's a part of me that also worries about just anything digital at some point that requires a firmware type thing at some point, if it's not supported anymore and it crashes. I don't know. It's a legit.
No, I think it's a valid concern. Or you brick it.
Yeah, or you brick it, which every time there's an update for one of these units, there's a bunch of people screaming on Facebook or the forum about how they did it wrong. They didn't follow the instructions, but they claim that it's the product's fault that they bricked it, trying to update it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I digress
there. I would say the reason I like the digital stuff is because, one, it's actually cheaper than my pick rig. And so I just look at any depreciation on that as, okay, cool. So I bought a Quad Cortex for $1,600. If I wind up selling it for $800 in 5 years, I got a heck of a lot of use out of that $800 over those years.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%.
So that's more where I'm at with it right now, where actually I could probably sell my Quad Cortex for more than I bought it for right now, but that's whatever. That's also me being a deal hunter. I bought my Kemper with a foot switch for $1,400. I could probably get that out of it right now, break even. Yeah. So like, it's, I thought it was a good deal. It's not anymore, but whatever.
That's a whole other episode too.
I got
the
years
whole
out of it.
The whole hunt for deals. Like that's a whole other separate episode about how you have to be looking for those kind of deals. And sometimes, not to go way down this, but
have money.
Have money. One, have money. Have a gear fund. Don't spend every spare penny you have on gear Don't go into debt if you can avoid it, or at least don't ever go into interest-bearing debt. 2, be aware that when you're looking for deals, you're not always going to be getting the thing you want, but you might find the right deal on something that you can turn into what you want. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
So anyway, that's been my amp journey. And as you can tell, a lot of those, even the Kemper and the Quad Cortex, both kind of found me.
Right.
I really wasn't going looking for them that hard. So, and, you know, I love the idea of, okay, here's all the amps I could ever have. Modelers sound fantastic. They replicate amp settings really, really, really well. And the amps sound really well at that setting.
Yep.
And there's part of me that like, okay, so I had a Quad Cortex. With my Quad Cortex, I actually went and captured my Super Reverb and my Vox. Because I could not find a Kemper profile that actually sounded like the way I dial in my Super Reverb.
Oh, interesting.
And particularly, I found these Super Reverb and Vox blended ones because it's a sound. It's a great sound.
Yep.
It didn't sound like how I had it. It didn't have the chime the way I had it. The way I kind of let the Vox be a little grittier than I let the Super Reverb be. You know, some of those kind of things that I really like. So until I actually was able to create my own captures, did I ever have my settings the way I like the amp? And that started making me think, okay, so I'm downloading all these Tone Junkie captures, our Michael Britt. I've never vibed with a Michael Britt profile.
Oh,
I just don't. Everyone I hear play with them, they sound great. I never vibe with them. Don't know what's wrong with me. So there's a bit of me that wants to kind of finally try some of these mythical amps or things I never really looked at, but frankly, I now have the money to look at.
Yeah.
Because by the way, sell your gear right now. It's tax season. It sells.
Yeah, you've been in what I did earlier, in January, divesting yourself of stuff to free up some gear money to do some fun things with.
I sold 6 pedals and I now have $1,500 because some of those were unobtainium pedals. But thank you, Sweetwater Rep. You hooked me up really well with that limited edition Boss pedal. That flipped really nicely. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a big one.
So you and I were talking. And I was like, all right, here I'm at $1,500. And then I looked at how much those Voxes are going for right now. And I'm like, shoot, if I sell that, I can go buy like a 2-Rock. I could go buy a Morgan. I could go buy a Dr. Z. I could go buy whatever I want.
Right. Yeah.
And then I went
freed up a bunch of cash.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm not, you know, getting rid of my house fund, trying to get something fun.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to shop for an amp.
Yeah. So
I just don't.
Shopping for an amp right now is maybe the hardest it's ever been. Because
why do you say that?
So, because right now it should be the easiest it's ever been. Let's be honest. It should be the easiest.
I mean, I go turn on my Kemper. I have all the amps. I should just pick the one I like and go, right? Like
right.
That's kind of like where my head's at, and I'm like, wait, no, that's not what I'm trying to do.
And it's also not the same. Like you said, there's that whole thing of, especially with the capture devices like the Quad Cortex and the Kemper, the Helix is a little different because it's a modeler and not a capture. They intentionally model it to try to capture it to, oh God, there's that word again, capture, to try to give the essence of the amp through the entire spectrum of how you'd use it.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, the Quad Cortex does that too. But
yes. But that also means there's some compromises there too. Let's be honest. You know, whereas you get your amp to exactly like you like it and you capture it, all right, you've got that tone, but then you start tweaking things. Well, it's guessing at that point. It's like, it might do this when you turn this knob this way.
So both the Kemper and the Quad Cortex, if you look at the EQ sections on them, they are the EQs if you plugged it into a desk. That's how you should think of the EQ on them.
That's a good way to look at it. So it's still that same amp sound, but now
you're adjusting the EQ on the mic, not on the guitar, not the amp.
That's a good way to look at it.
Gain control does accurately work though.
Yeah.
As long as you're going down.
So the thing
not
with
going
amps now The thing that's harder with amp shopping now than it ever has been, one, your average guitar shop has fewer guitar amps than they've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I looked a little while back because I was really curious, because I was really curious about amp sales and how they're doing. Amp sales are not as far down as you'd think they would be.
I mean, Tim Marcus is still living pretty good, right? I mean,
yeah.
you got
yeah,
he's still sold out. You got Two Rocks doing well, Morgan's doing well.
So the market metric, the market share analysis that I saw, and I could look it up later if I'm not feeling too lazy enough to look it up, but you can just search for it. Search for guitar amp market share, and it'll bring it up. And they did something like a 10 or 15 or 20 year analysis, and you could see they're in the late 2000s into the 2010s. There's the market share analysis, and then it starts to slide just a little, nothing dramatic, and then you don't see a major dip until 2020. And 2020, that makes sense. Well, guess what happened in 21 and 22? It buoyed back up to almost where it was before. Now, here's the thing. I can't separate that out. I haven't found data that separates that out into, tube amps, things like the Katana. I'm sure the Katana buoyed that market significantly. I don't even know how many of those things sold, but it had to be a bunch of them. And then I don't know if they're counting things like the Helix and the Kemper and the Quad Cortex in that market value, so market share. So I can't tell you, but I can tell you it's almost where it was 10 years ago as far as amp market share in sales. Now guitars have changed dramatically, but they're still not in the shops the way they used to be. Not to the level. And also, there's so many options out there compared to 15, 20 years ago. Look, 15 years ago, when I did most of my amp shopping and buying, I played a lot of vintage stuff. And when I say vintage, I'm not talking about, I played a whole bunch of 65 black panel deluxe reverbs and, whatever Marshall plexis. I played a couple. I did play a handful, but I'm talking, I played a lot of Silvertone and Custom, Custom, a lot of those. I used to have one of those, when they reissued them. Trainers, when they made that comeback there in the 2000s. You remember when they made Trainer amps again?
Well,
a couple of those.
Yeah. Also, remember I lived in Canada for a while, so I had Trainers shoved down my throat pretty hard when I lived up there.
Yeah, I bet you did. I had a couple of those, but I've played a lot of amps. And got to see a bunch of those. But if you went into your average shop, they had Fender.
Mm-hmm.
They had Marshall valve states. They had a lot of valve states. Not a lot of Marshall tube amps in the U.S.
No.
At least not in the shops I was going into. I wasn't exactly going into the big boy shops. They had PV where I was, of course. And, when I lived in Murfreesboro, I'd go into shops there, and of course, I'd get to actually see things like Matchless, Bad Cat, and Mesa Boogie. Those were in the boutique shops. Now, like, I'm trying to think the last time I went into a music store, like down here, not like walking into Chicago Music Exchange or something like that, where they actually
CME doesn't have a lot of amps either.
No, they really don't. They've got those few rooms that have amps in them.
Yeah, and then they have the used stuff up in the front, and that's it.
And which they had that when we were there last year, they had that flip top Ampeg that I still think about. Not flip top bass rig, mind you, listeners. They had the flip top guitar rig. Anyway, I won't lament not being able to buy that. But you've got to hunt harder now, and there's so many more options. And you're lucky to be in Chicago where you do have a bunch of places you can go play some things, but everything is so different. So the first tip that I give when people are amp shopping, because I talked about this I already told you, I recorded 4 episodes last week, and so I don't remember which show we talked about it on. I think it was on the Guitar Nerds. I talked about I'm an amp guy. Amps amps to me are your sound. The guitar is how you input into that, and the amps are your sound. And pedals are meant to augment that, but the core of your sound's an amplifier. So I'm hardcore about getting the right amp for the job. So that's the thing you got to know first. What is the job? What is it you want an amp to do? Do you want an all singing, all dancing, do it all? Well, you're going to make some compromises there. You're not going to necessarily get the best of everything you want to do. Or, this is where the camp I tend to fall into. Do you have a very specific sound that you're like, this is me, this is my core, and everything from outside of this is going to sound sort of like this, but I'm going to augment it.
So that's where I feel stuck. And actually,
Okay.
so I was taking a little note here of like, how do I want to structure this discussion? Because it's mid-work week, so I'm still in my type A mode.
It's okay.
So the first thing I wrote down was, do I want something different or something better of the same? And
well, you already have a vintage Super, so you're not getting better.
See, so when you were describing, you're like, hey, how do I, what you were describing right when you were wrapping up there, I was like, I already have my Super.
Right.
I'm done there. And like the goofy one is like the amps I'm following are like all over the place. One of them I'm thinking was the PRS Tremonti.
Okay, that's not at all something I would have thought you'd be going after.
I'm kind of feeling some like I was feeling dual rec curious.
So I'm in that boat too. So we'll talk about that
Okay.
here in a minute. Let's come back to that.
It's too deep of a can of worms. I'm scared of it.
Yeah.
There was like
some advice there.
There was like JCM 800, JCM
Yeah.
900. What do I do? And so like that's part of where I'm like, just like, am I just doing this to try something new?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other parts of it too of like, I've always done combo amps. I never had to pick a speaker.
Oh yeah, so you're not even set on combo versus head and cab yet.
No, so I'm leaning head and cab just from a cost standpoint.
Highly recommend.
The reality that I'm a silent rig guy. I live in an apartment, and I have a 2 Notes Captor X.
Yep.
So I don't need a cabinet.
Nope, not at all. And if you ever did want to, like for example, I recently bought. So all of my head. I have 3 head and cab combos. And I have the cabs because I am an idiot and feel like I have to have matching units. Like that's a whole aesthetic thing for me, and I get it. But what I've also ended up with is 3 very different speaker cabinets. I have the 2-Rock 2x12, which is loaded with high wattage, very clean. The speakers that come in those, they're the 2-Rock proprietary, made by Warehouse Speakers.
We're trying to recreate the old EV JBL.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's not quite recreating the EV. They're not quite that big, but it might be something near the JBL. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to recreate, but they're clean. They're loud and they're clean. I think each speaker is rated for 90 watts, so it's like big and loud and clean. Then I have the divided by 13 matching cabinet for my RSA 31, and it's loaded with 2 Celestion Blues,
which is a fantastic speaker.
Yes, absolutely, and both of
with
those
a
open
Vox
back.
circuit. Yeah,
and they're such very different speaker cabinets. So, and then I've got my other divided by 13 cab that goes to my AMW 39, which is loaded with a Vintage 30 and a G12 H30. So,
okay,
closed back 212 Celestion speaker, ceramic magnet, like punch you in the gut kind of,
I kind of put that more in the Marshall territory.
Exactly. Very Marshall. Well, the amp is very much in the Marshall territory, so it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But I have those 3 different cabinets. I can mix and match as I want to. Although I'm probably never going to put the 2-Rock through the 2 Alnico Blues, because I do not. I don't want to have to replace those.
Because you have 100 watt.
Yeah, even at the 50 watt setting, I wouldn't want to run those through two Celestion Blues.
Well,
it's getting closer.
You could use your 2 Notes to protect it a little bit.
Yeah, I can. And dropping it down that attenuation level, it'd be super doable.
That chime might be a lot of fun.
But at that point, I'm using the 2 notes IR of Alnico Blues to record it directly.
And that's the other fun one. So of all the amp capture, blah 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 blah. So like, we capture amps exactly at that setting. 2 notes went over the top with their stuff where it's like, all right, here's your 18 or whatever different types of mics with every position possible.
Yep.
So there's nothing that like everything that they're modeling is modelable.
Yes.
I can't talk, but you know what I mean? Like there isn't like you can tweak all day and recreate how terribly I'm going to mic an amp in the real life with all those things. And so like the 2 notes answers the cab situation. And I'm way sooner ready to say, just buy 2 notes and don't worry about cabs than I am to say amp heads are dead.
Yeah, especially if you're not going to use it live, or even if you are, but you use a silent stage or you use in-ear monitors.
Hey,
if you're doing that, exactly, you do. Then suddenly the world is your oyster. I hate that phrase, but I'm going to use it. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But if you're like me and you play a lot of venues where you need the amp is the volume kind of thing. Like if there's a mic on your cabinet, you're lucky. If it makes to front of house, you're even luckier. Kind of thing. But you don't need
gigs around here are becoming more and more sound guys like you to mic to do a direct feed.
See, that's interesting.
Even bar gigs.
Yeah, so I was talking to a buddy of mine, James, who goes to more shows than anyone I know. That's all he does in his spare time is travel and go to shows. And so I got curious because we were having this conversation in the Effects Loop Patreon Facebook chat about amps live, and he has been to everything from, I think he saw Billy Strings live 3 times last year.
That's a crazy rigged, by the way.
Yeah. He goes around and but he's seen a ton of local shows, and he saw a bunch of big time shows. And of the electric shows he saw, I asked him how many times he saw an electric player without an amp on stage. 0.
Oh, I mean,
yeah, it's an interesting thing to see that.
But was it a real amp, and was it really being used, and was it running through the house, and yada yada?
Yeah, it's a thing. But having said all that, it's interesting to see how it varies all over the place. But with a Captor X, and it's starting to sound like an ad for 2 notes, and it should, because I
sponsor us both, please.
Right,
2 notes,
come on, 2 notes, come on board. I am here for it.
Give me that Z-Rec you had at Summer NAMM, and we're good.
I am a 2 notes user and lover. I love the Captor X. I almost bought a second one for no good reason except to have a second one.
Oh, mine was to use both my amps at the same time.
Yeah, that would ultimately be what I wanted to do. But it's so ludicrous. It's absolutely decadent at that point, right? Like, it's ludicrous. But
I think having 3 amps and cabs is decadent, but
yeah, well,
but I own 4 amps.
I bought a little Mesa Boogie closed back 112 that I found in a consignment store for super cheap. Why did I want a 112? Because sometimes when I gig, I don't want to carry a 212. That's why I bought a 112. Also, I got it for $250 out the door, and I couldn't argue with that at all.
Yep.
So I think you're right. I think head is the direction to go, because you as a player don't need more speakers in your life.
No, I don't even need the speakers I currently have in my life.
Exactly.
And I honestly want to go to an amp head because I'm like, oh, cool, I'll actually use it.
We should also talk about you possibly buying an amp head shell for your Super.
Thought about it.
Yeah, I've thought about it with mine as well, but that's a whole other ballgame.
Biggest issue with the Super is that since I have a true vintage one with its original transformer, modeling, 2 notes, all those things require a lot of extra hardware.
Yeah, namely a Z matcher,
which I own,
yes,
but it's a pain.
Yeah, it's extra work. It's 100% extra
It's
work.
a lot of extra work. And I mean, what's nice about the Super is it's an open cab. So my Z Matcher and my Two Notes. Oh,
Yeah,
don't
what a
own a Tune Rock
combination.
yet.
I mean, I do that all the time.
My Two Notes can both live in the bottom of it as I move the amp around.
That makes sense.
But
that makes it so heavy. It's already so heavy.
Yeah, luckily I'm huge.
It's true. We had that conversation about the fact because you're so tall, you actually get to pick up a Super. I have to grab the handle and lean to hope to get it off the ground.
Well, that's like the how do I justify having a 60-pound pedal board? Is it's the same weight as my Super, so I'm balanced when I'm walking with it. But I'm 6'6" and built, so like I can carry that weight.
Yeah. I could if I were 6 inches taller, but I'm not. I'm not going to get 6 inches taller.
Yep.
Okay, so
all right, so let's go back to this discussion here because, all right, obviously,
so I think amp head.
We're at amp head. Now here's the fun one. Like I go to a store and I want to try out all these amp heads. Now I'm dependent on the cab too, and I just don't know what to do. How do I go into a store? Okay, I have Chicago Music Exchange, Rock and Roll Vintage, Midwest Buy Sell, some really great options.
Yeah.
I'm so intimidated just by the idea of going into the store and being like, hey, I want to try some amps. Like guitars all day, just pick it off the wall. Yeah, I like this. I don't like it. Within 10 seconds.
Yeah,
you put it back on the wall.
Plug a guitar in. I don't even need to plug it in.
So like guitar shopping, and I've done that all day. And also the other fun one is, so I have been for so long kind of a pedal platform amp guy.
Yeah.
Where I focused on the guitars is how I change stuff up. The amp is locked in. That's been my mentality.
This is the second stage of what do you want it to do? Do you want, because I have my suggestion here too. If what you want is a pedal platform, look at that. That'd be a fun word. Pedal platform amp.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot simpler. I got a lot of suggestions there.
But I already own a Super Reverb.
Exactly. You already own one. Or do you want an amp that actually puts some character into what you're doing? Now, here's the caveat, and I will give you from personal experience. The first time I ever owned an AC30, I wanted an AC30 because I loved Rory Gallagher. I love Rory Gallagher. I love the sound of a Strat into a cranked AC30. Or I love it when other people play it, is what it ended up being. It took me years to reconcile myself with how to play differently. And this is a complete overgeneralization, how to play with EL84 amplifiers, because they respond so differently than my big bottle 6L6 Fender style amps.
Yeah, they don't like neck pickups as much.
They don't like that as much. They respond quicker.
They don't have reverb built in very often.
Yep. So it's if that's your vibe, but they have a character. They have more. To me, they have a little more character in like they're more interesting. In a lot of ways.
I actually, so that journey all started. I was a friend of the show, Mark Schwartz, and I were he was in town, and we went to a guitar store. And we went in an amp room with a Jazzmaster, and he's like, have you ever tried one of these? And he had an AC15 hand-wired sitting there. And I was like, yeah, I played like a AC30 CC, one of those kind of things.
Oh, yeah.
And I played at bedroom levels, so I was never driving it that hard.
So you never really heard it. You got it?
I never really heard it. I just knew it as this thing I just didn't love. And then, he's like, no, have you really played one? And he kicks it into hot mode, turns the master down, so we're not bleeding our ears, but then he cranks the preamp gain up, and I'm like, oh my God, I love this thing. I love it now that it's, the high end starts clipping and it balances itself out and it just growls and it's awesome.
Yep.
So then, within a year, an AC15 hand-wired falls in my lap from just people I know. And I'm like, yes, no questions. And I love it. But the other part is when we look at, okay, so there's the standard amps, right? Yeah. So there's the JCM 800, there's the AC, there's the Fender platform.
Yeah.
Am I really missing something? Those are the archetypes, right?
Yeah, because I think the Fender platform, and some people get really mad at me for doing this.
All Fender amps are the same. Fight me.
Yeah, yeah. They're very, very similar until you get to like the smallest amps, or you get to like their like later weird circuits. Like I apologize for calling them weird things, like the Supersonic and like some of the more modern stuff they made.
Okay.
Do you
I would
remember
not call the Supersonic weird at all, but
Yeah.
the
Do you remember
Supersonic is the Fender amp you all actually want
It
and
really
didn't
is.
buy.
Yeah. Or do you remember the old the custom shop Tone Master, not the solid state things, but the custom shop Tone Master amp they made that was in like the blonde Tolex. It was like 100 watts, super overpowered. Anyway, most Fender amps, especially the EQ circuit, the preamp, it's identical. The only thing that changes is the power section. And in some models, whether it's bias or optical trim, and the smaller amps, it's a bias trim. It's not an optical trim,
which some people prefer.
I prefer a bias trim.
There's a reason why vibro champs are,
or
so
why
sought
the
after.
Princeton reverb is so popular. Has a bias trim instead of an optical trim. So, but yeah. Fender, you've got your Fender sound. You've got we're going to oversimplify it. We got your Vox sound. Marshall is the one that I think you do have to divide into two versions.
Okay.
There's the modern hot rod Marshall, and then there's the vintage Marshall. There's two styles of sound there. But yeah, so you've got your basically oversimplify your JTM 45 versus your JCM 800.
Sure.
Fair. So what do you want? Like, to me, if you went Fender, first of all, you've already got that covered.
Well, then there's the boutique tier, right? And then there's the whole clout and all, or more features that you're after.
Yeah.
Or the magical dumble.
Sometimes all boutique is doing is getting you into a better component version of those same sounds.
Well, you know, we talked about, hey, Scott, what amp are you thinking about? And I was like, well, maybe a Z-Rec. It's just I don't want to say it's just a Vox, but it's a Vox.
No, it's Vox. It's Vox perfected. It is, to me. That's what I always think of when I think of the Trainwreck and the Z-Rec sound. It's Vox perfected. It's a Vox that won't catch fire. For one thing, Vox are notorious overheaters, especially vintage ones. I know they got better, and y'all, I'm completely overgeneralizing. I'm sure all of you, like I have played Vox amps that never once caught fire. So, but yeah, so you're looking at basically a bougie bougie Vox. Then you've also got, and while I was in there,
you also have the bougie Fenders, a la Two-Rock.
Two-Rock, that's exactly. My traditional clean is nothing but a super fancy twin reverb. People are gonna be real mad at me. They're gonna be real mad, but that's what it is. It's now, having said that, I never got along with a twin reverb. I love my traditional clean. Or if you go with the CRS, the custom reverb signature, you're looking at a hot rodded super reverb is really what those are. They're a little higher wattage, but, and then, you know, I mentioned divided by 13, which in your scenario works. In my scenario, unless I plug it into the captor, I can't ever turn that thing up. The divided by 13s are the loudest amplifiers I've ever heard in my entire life. Ignore the wattage. It means nothing. But
particularly on British circuits, because they break up so early.
Yes, exactly.
You got to remember, wattage is clean power before distortion.
My last big gig, my last like 4-hour gig, like where we could actually turn up and be loud, I took the RSA 31, put it down to half power. Holy crap, did that sound so good. It's the first time I've gotten to gig it. And so I was thinking about selling it until I played that gig, and then I was like, oh, never mind. It's not going anywhere.
All right. So we've got the boutique better archetype. Like if I want a better Fender, I go look at Milkman. If I want a combo, unfortunately, it doesn't do a lot of heads.
No.
You got Two-Rock, you've got whoever else. You got all those different things.
And then you got, and you mentioned it earlier, you got the Dumble thing, which is sort of its own thing. The Dumble sound.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
It's a better Fender.
It is.
It's a fatter Fender. And you have ODS clones galore. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was amp curious was like, maybe I just buy a Seriatone kit and put it together. And pretend to use that electrical engineering degree that's hanging on the wall.
I mean, it's an option.
It's an option. And part of me is like, I kind of want a project. I kind of want to mess with something. I kind of want to... DIY stuff's hard to sell. So if I don't like it, I'm kind of stuck with it.
Yep. And that I hate to say that should always be something you're thinking about. But if you're trying things and you're not 100% sold on something,
I'm fully planning on amp journeying this. Yeah.
You should absolutely think about, okay, what can I sell this for? Another amp that you might want to put on your radar as we're talking about this is Amplified Nation. Look at if you're looking at that possible Dumble thing. And let's be honest, I know a lot of your influences, and Dumble is right there in that camp.
Yeah, and I may have been using a capture of a certain Wonderland style amp. So that would have been the Seriatone kit I would have probably gone after. I mean...
So let's talk through this. What we know you don't want at this point, at least I feel like. Tell me if I'm hearing this wrong. You don't need another pedal platform amp. So you're not looking for a clean machine.
No.
So let's go ahead and just say we're not looking at Fenders. We're not looking at hot rodded Fenders for the most part. I know it's a tough one.
It's kind of one of those, like, it was like me with online dating last year. I wasn't really looking for my wife. I was looking to try a lot. And at the end of the day, I'm going to wind up back at a certain type of person. I was just kind of seeing what the rest of the field was like.
I get it. No, I get it, because I always come back to the Fender sound. I always come back to it.
I'm going to come back to a tall brunette woman at some point. I'm not editing that out either.
We're gonna leave that analogy. It's gonna stay right there. We're gonna let that simmer a little bit. So yeah, but you know where you're gonna come back to, but you've already got that, so you don't have to start there. This is your chance to decide what else you might like. I think, just based on the fact that you do like the Vox sound, you've had the AC-15.
And I love the AC-15.
I think your next logical step is to try out a couple of flavors of that circuit. Who knows? You might actually find something you like a whole lot more. And in that camp of that whole Vox circuit, my recommendations would be Z-Rec. I think 100% you got to look at the Z-Rec. If you can find one, I highly recommend you look at the Divided by 13 RSA 31s, because I was actually looking for a matchless C30, HC, DC, whatever. 30. I was looking at that, but I found the RSA 31. While we're at it, if you're looking to spend some money, it's hard to go wrong with a matchless C30. I mean, that's serious money, though. That's the most expensive amp we've mentioned.
So far.
So far. And I think it will be the most expensive amp we mentioned. Some other ones I would look at that I have tried but never owned. Well, I've never owned a matchless either. But I've played a few of them. Also look at the Third Power. Is the woolly coats? I'm not really good at the Third Power model names, but they have one that's based on a Vox circuit. I highly recommend those. And also look at the Bad Cat. And they've got a Bad Cat Hot Cat 30R, I think is their Vox style, and it has reverb on board as well, which I know is important to you because it's important to me.
Well, not with the 2 notes.
Yeah, that's true. With the 2 notes, you can get away with it. Like, my other amps don't have reverb, but I do. If I can have reverb on board, it's helpful.
So here's some fun questions for you.
Okay.
You did not mention a Benson Monarch in that grouping.
I didn't. You want to know why?
Why?
Although I love Benson amps, I love Chris Benson. Those are, you're not, even in Chicago, you're probably not going to find one of those to try out.
I've played one at CME.
Oh, do they have one at CME?
They had one in the amp room for a little bit.
Okay.
But that's such a tiny room
Yeah.
that I could not get along with that amp.
Also, there's a lot fewer of them.
Yep.
So finding one to buy without getting on a wait list is going to be harder.
So I'm kind of in the mood to I want to try a bunch, but a wait list is not out of the question.
Okay. Yeah.
Considering I have a wait list. I was on a wait list for what, 2.5 years for a pedal that's coming this week. So I don't mind wait lists, because the other fun thing about wait lists is if I don't like it, I know I can sell it.
That's true. That's a good point. That's an excellent point. And usually you're getting your value out of it at the end of it more multiplied. So that's definitely an option.
But at the same time,
especially if you're starting from cash, but at the same time, you're also going to end up delaying. I don't know what Chris's wait times look like right now. I don't know.
I think it's about a year.
Oh yeah. That's a long time. I would have forgotten I ordered that amp.
I know. It will be awesome.
But if you're okay with wait times, you may as well go whole hog and order a train wreck.
What do you mean?
Order a train wreck. They're still making train wrecks. They didn't die with... Oh, I'm sorry, that's really bad terminology. When Fisher passed, his son took up the company. They're still building train wreck amps. You can order one today.
For real? I didn't know.
For real. Dan, so I hope I'm not spilling this, Dan. I'm sorry. Dan Pilver with Lewitt Microphone, one of our podcast Patreon supporters, has a train wreck coming next month that he put an order in last year before that.
Mm-hmm.
Just order a train wreck. I think he's getting the train wreck Express.
Nice.
So there's another one on your radar.
Yeah, the other one I didn't hear from you was a Morgan Dual.
I don't recommend Morgan's.
Why not?
That's a long story, and that's a conversation we can have off the air.
All right, Patreon.
Yeah,
Patreon.
We can talk about that on the Patreon episode. There
All
you
right.
go. I will share some experience with Morgan amplifiers over on the Patreon episode. Speaking of the Patreon episode, we are nearing the end of time on our regular episode. So listeners, if you want to continue this amp journey with us, and it has been a fun one, and there's still more to explore, you can go over to patreon.com/40watt podcast. And for as little as $3 a month, you can get this episode ad-free. Now, what that means, so listening to this episode, you had some ads at the top of the episode. You may have actually gotten some dynamically stitched ads in the middle of this episode. Well, for $3 a month over on Patreon, you don't get any of those ads. And ads are, I hate to tell you all this, but the ads are going to increase as more, I get more monetization options. And I've actively got a couple of slots available for companies. If you're a company and you want to advertise on this podcast, I have slots. You should email me at 40wattpodcast@gmail.com. I will get your ads on this show. We will talk about your products. But for $3 a month over on Patreon, you can skip all of that. You get to skip the line. For $5 a month, you get this episode ad-free. You also get an extra special bonus Patreon-only episode, which is where we're going to talk about some things more about amp selections over on that episode. And then you could, if you're feeling frisky, that options go all the way up to $50 a month, where like Blake, you could sign up for $50 a month. We'll do lessons every month, whether you want to do guitar, bass, keys. If you've already played keys, you probably know more than I can teach you. We'll do music theory, or we'll just shoot the breeze. It doesn't matter to me. You can do that as well, and your support is greatly appreciated. In the meantime, though, we're going to go over to that episode and talk more about amps. Remember to look in the description below for a bunch of links that I haven't mentioned in a while. I've got a Reverb affiliate link down there. I've got a Stringjoy affiliate link down there where you can get Stringjoy strings, or you can buy things on Reverb. You're going to buy things anyway on Reverb. You may as well help support the show. And then there's some merch down there that, honestly, I haven't looked at Teespring in a while. I need to make some more merch, probably. But that's the spiel, y'all. I'm done talking, I promise. So, Scott, thanks for coming on the episode. Hope we're helping you on your amp search. We're gonna nail it down in the Patreon. I feel it coming.
Also, listen to the Effects Loop podcast. Thanks.
Yeah, well, that was where I was going. So you can, Scott, where can they find you?
Oh, at theeffectsloop.com. Yeah, it will be our link to everything. We really only do the podcast. You can buy stuff. Join
you
our
can buy
Patreon.
stuff. There's a really, really fun Patreon chat for Patreon supporters.
Also, once in a while, Diaz gets manic and we'll make like 4 YouTube shorts. So follow us on YouTube.
And TikTok. He sometimes does the TikTok.
Yeah.
Y'all are on Instagram.
It'll be a really fun week where he releases all of those at once and then forgets about it.
And also, if you go over to their Patreon and subscribe at a certain level that I won't try to remember, y'all can go look it up. You can get Diaz to write you a handwritten letter.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Or at least he's supposed to.
We have some great tiers. I think at our top tier, I think I said I will just give you Diaz's phone number and you get to FaceTime him anytime you want. That's our top tier. We haven't had anybody take him up on it yet, but it's there.
I tell you what. No, I was going to say, if you subscribe at my top tier, I'll give you Diaz's number. I'm not going to do that. Don't subscribe for that reason. Do not. All right, y'all, seriously, I think we're done here. We're going to go over to the Patreon and we're going to talk a little more. In the meantime, until I see y'all again, remember to be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and make some noise.